Welcome, my fellow wrestling fan, and thank you for tuning in to the Two Bros Wrestling Show. I am your host, Kevin. We are without Doug. We're on hiatus from our regular format. If you have joined us in the past, if it's your first time, thank you for joining us for this special episode. Shout out to Doug, who is normally with us. And also shout out to any of our American fans who are watching for the 4th of July holiday that is upcoming and 250 years of our American experiment, where unfortunately we are also at 250 degrees across much of the country this week. So stay cool, whatever it is you plan on doing to celebrate this upcoming weekend. But we're here today to talk about the hot weekend that was last week. And I'm not talking necessarily temperature hot, I'm talking the wrestling world hot of what was in many ways probably too much of a good thing. We're here today to talk about the biggest weekend in recent wrestling memory, and we're going to do it by breaking down 5 takeaways from this past weekend, because we did not have one, we did not have 2, we did not even have 3. We had 4 major PLEs taking place this past weekend, with WWE's Night of Champions, AEW's Forbidden Door, TNA's Slammiversary, and NXT's CW debut of their PLEs when they presented the Great American Bash. That's not even counting regular weekend wrestling programming such as Collision and NWA Power and AAA and MLW Fusion, etc., etc. It does make it by far the most wrestling intensive weekend in recent memory. And so we are going to break it down with those 5 key takeaways from what I have dubbed the Night of the Forbidden Slammbash. So let's just go ahead and get started. As I said up top, number 1, it is definitely too much of a good thing. I get it. Sometimes schedules collide. Sometimes a promotion is going to move forward and not be concerned about what another promotion is doing. I also understand that sometimes it is counter programming. Still, you take all of that in combination when you consider that, excluding all those other programs I mentioned earlier that were not PLEs or pay-per-views, if you just look at the pay-per-views alone, we are talking a combined 14 and a half hours of wrestling content. And that is just wrestling content. The pre-shows, the post-shows for these broadcasts, you factor that in, that's going to push you closer to 17 or so hours of content. Obviously, only the most dedicated with time on their hands are going to be able to take all that in, particularly in one weekend. I know that I didn't get everything watched on the weekend. I am in the middle of the week and just now finishing up some of these broadcasts and still have a few programs that I want to catch up on. So I don't know that we do ourselves any favors by cramming as much as we can all into a 48-hour space. Somebody is ultimately going to lose out when we do it that way. Which brings me to key takeaway 2 of the weekend. Yes, there is a loser, and that loser is very obviously TNA. Slammiversary is TNA's biggest show of the year, and yet here they are being overshadowed by the big 2 organizations in pro wrestling. TNA tried to compensate by moving their show to the afternoon so that they would avoid head-to-head competition with AEW and Forbidden Door. But when you consider all the big news that was made this weekend, some of which we're going to get here and our other key takeaways, it's very clear that TNA and their signature show, mind you, is the one that is getting shortchanged this weekend. They crowned a new TNA World Champion with Nick Nemeth beating Mike Santana, who, if rumor is to be believed, is done with TNA and pretty soon on his way to WWE. Former WWE creative and on-air superstar Road Dogg made his debut at TNA this past weekend on the creative side of things. So just a lot going on in TNA that unfortunately fewer people than normal probably kept up with or saw because of the competition. WWE obviously has had a working relationship with TNA that does appear to be a little more on the wane. Not as much recently as what we have seen in the past between the NXT TNA partnership. Obviously, WWE is going to look after its own, so they're going to prioritize their well-being over that of their partners in TNA. I think WWE was more worried about counter-programming AEW this weekend than they were whatever TNA was doing, and TNA truly was the one that got lost in this shuffle. And lost they did get. It was a very strong show that was very well reviewed by those who saw it. And if that was not you, maybe you want to throw TNA that bone and go check out what was their signature event, and a very good one at that, with solid bell-to-bell action in most of the matches and a main event that had a world title change. Which brings us to takeaway number 3, and that was NXT on the CW. It is a big deal that WWE's PLEs are now airing for free on broadcast television. This was the first time that occurred. Night one, they averaged around 394,000 viewers for their initial PLE broadcast, which in many ways is not bad. Sometimes that's been, in the range of what AEW is going to do on their like Collision, for example. But when you look at what NXT has done thus far on the CW on a normal Tuesday night for their show, this PLE came in at about half of what the most recent number of viewers were for the NXT weekly Tuesday broadcast. So when you consider that, was it being crowded out? Was it maybe not all the competition this weekend and some wrestling fatigue? Perhaps it was your CW viewer, your NXT viewer is not yet accustomed to searching for the PLEs or tuning in for the PLEs on this new broadcast partner. I do not know what the answer is. Obviously, it is a mixed result with a solid but maybe underwhelming rating for a first time, when you might expect that you would get something a little larger than that on a Saturday evening on broadcast TV. Either way, though, it was a good show and one worth checking out. It was highlighted by wrestling's best women's division. I know they use that as a tagline, but it is not just sloganeering. It is true that the NXT women's division has long been its secret, or not so secret rather, weapon. They put the women in the main event and they delivered. Lola Vice, Layla Gray. It also is a testament to the fact that Layla Gray, having been crowned your new women's champion in NXT, is definitely a horse that they are betting on strongly in the world of WWE. She has the potential to be the most impactful, or one of the most impactful talents in the history of women's wrestling, and that is not hyperbole. Anyone who has seen her wrestle knows this. She has some areas of her overall game, promos and such, that I know needs a little work, but when it comes to in-ring action, she is already there. And the fact that they have crowned her this soon, they rocketed her from Evolve, first of all, pretty quickly, and she's already at the top of NXT. It would not be surprising if she finds her way to the main roster sooner rather than later. And speaking of which, her opponent, who held her own without question, was Lola Vice, who has already shown that she can impact both sides of the border, working at NXT, representing WWE very strongly in AAA. It would not be a surprise to me, considering how much talent is already at NXT, if this is a graduation for Lola Vice. She may actually win this match despite losing it, by the fact that it could mean a call up to the main roster for her. She is obviously ready. She has a lot of charisma, a lot of talent, and will be an excellent addition to the main roster division when she does get brought in. Key takeaway number 4, AEW did some crowning of its own, and maybe more literally crowning of its own, in the fact that they finished up their tournament, handed out some trophies during Forbidden Door, specifically to Mercedes Moné, who is now a 2-time Owen Hart winner, and then Will Ospreay in your main event, defeating Swerve Strickland. Let's talk about the event itself. AEW puts on the best pay-per-views as far as star ratings and in-ring action. I don't think there's a lot of question about that. There's often question about the booking and other things with AEW, but not the technical talent and expertise that they like to highlight. They are the wrestling company, and they did that again. Specifically, now looking at your Owen Hart winners, Maya World had quite a run in this tournament. I know they leaned heavily into her personal story, which I'm always iffy on when it concerns real life death, which is the case with Maya World. But it did seem for a moment that they might go all the way with this feel good story by letting her do the upset. She wrestled a great match against Mercedes. I don't know that Mercedes needs to win 2 years in a row when you had a chance to do, as NXT did with Layla Gray, to elevate someone here that maybe could have used the elevation into that next realm of stardom. I'm sure, though, that still down the road, my world had a good showing and definitely looked good in defeat, and hopefully they have big plans for her. As for Mercedes, she is on her way to London and All In, which is exactly where Will Ospreay is headed as well. Last year, Ospreay came oh so close in the Owen Hart tournament to punching his ticket to All In. That did not happen. A lot of folks have waited for a while. It just makes sense that you're going to end one of these big Wembley shows with Will Ospreay standing tall. So it was not necessarily a foregone conclusion that he would beat Swerve Strickland here. A lot of people thought that because of the tie-in to All In, that he was going in previous years, and then they would swerve us. No pun intended. This time they did not. They went with what everyone has long expected, and that is a Wembley Stadium main event featuring the home country favorite of Will Ospreay. He and Swerve Strickland have amazing chemistry. This was the match of the weekend. Amongst all the 18 billion hours of wrestling that was on this past weekend, you will not find a better match than the one these two put on in the main event of Forbidden Door. Certainly 5 stars, certainly worthy of your time, certainly worthy of a pay-per-view main event. And Will Ospreay is a right winner in this scenario. So let's see where they go with him at All In. Will they continue the obvious route and have him walk away world champion? I don't think too many people would be disappointed solely by the fact that they aren't surprised. Which leads us to our final takeaway, and maybe a segue there for surprise, and that is the surprise that was the talk of the weekend. Despite what AEW did with the in-ring action, despite what TNA did with their signature event, despite what NXT put on with their first broadcast ever on the CW, the main takeaway that everyone is talking about, and I don't mean to bury the lead, I'm wanting to save the best for last, but it is the best. It's Sami Zayn. It's Sami Zayn winning the undisputed world championship on pay-per-view. The man that many thought would never be world champion is now world champion, outlasting Gunther and Cody Rhodes in a triple threat main event. Sami was definitely the babyface in Saudi Arabia. I know that there has been talk that if it were to ever happen for Sami Zayn, who has been wrestling for nearly 25 years, been in WWE for 10 years, did not have Vince McMahon's seal of approval as someone who seemed like a main eventer, much less a world champion. So the fact that age and that bias and everything maybe at this point in time seemed to be, if ever it were to happen, it would have happened a while ago. Maybe Sami's time had passed. It didn't pass. They pulled the trigger on it. When they set it up as a triple threat and they had it in Saudi Arabia, which, Sami is Syrian in descent, so he is very popular, very over in the Middle East. There has been talk for a while that if it was to ever happen, it would happen at one of these crown jewel events that they do in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia. But of course, we have WrestleMania coming up in Saudi Arabia next year. And so that has been the rumor for a while, that Sami would find his way into a main event and finally win the big one at the biggest stage of them all in front of a friendly Middle Eastern crowd. I know that is not the way that it went down. So in that sense, they managed to make it maybe a bit more of a surprise than it otherwise would have been. And I don't think, despite the fact that maybe Sami would dream it up as finally winning the big one on the biggest stage, I don't think he is going to complain about finally being crowned a world champion when it was something that seemed so out of reach, so elusive, so not in the cards for him for a very long time. I don't know that he will quibble over the timing of this and just be grateful for the fact that it happened. We should all be grateful for the fact that it happened. I thought there was a possibility just because of the Saudi Arabia setting. Also, when you put a triple threat, there's always that possibility that you have a fluke victor where the champion is not involved in the finish, and therefore it's not tainted per se, but somewhat less than, and gives an excuse, an out for the champion losing that title. I am happy to say they did not go that route. As I watched this with my wife, she's like, I think that Sammy's going to pin Cody. I told her, like, no, if anything, he's going to pin Gunther, and then that way he and Cody have beef because Cody didn't really lose, not to Sammy anyway, even though he would have had to relinquish the title. They didn't do any of that. They almost made it pretty straight up. There wasn't even any nefarious means by which Sammy captured the title. It was a fairly clean victory where it was the champion who was pinned. Now, do I think Sammy is going to be a long-term champion? No. And I know that the term transitional champion has a negative connotation, but for someone who was never intended in many people's eyes, management, I should say, to ever be a world champion, I think that even if it does end up being a bit of a transitional period, that Sammy would still take it to be able to have that on his resume. I expect him to have a reigns similar to what his best friend Kevin Owens has had in the past, where he might not be considered the most dominant of world champions or may not hold it long, but he can say he was a world champion. And now Sami Zayn can definitely say that. I don't see him holding it maybe beyond as much as 5 weeks from now and SummerSlam. But we'll see where it goes. For now, let's all just relish in the fact that the former El Generico, Sami Zayn, the last real good guy, as he would say, is a world champion. Let's see how he's received when he gets back to domestic soil. He is not, by the way, the first Muslim world champion, which I've seen reported elsewhere, because that would be the first WWE Muslim world champion would be the Iron Sheik. It's the first world champion in more than 40 years that WWE has had. I guess technically speaking, if you will want to call it the WWE Undisputed World Championship, then yes, Sami is first. But either way, it is definitely a trailblazing effort made by Sami Zayn, a wonderful wrestler and a pretty stand-up human being. I think we all can agree. And so whether you love him or love to boo him, let's put the kayfabe aside for a moment and just respect what Sami Zayn has accomplished after so long working in this industry. And with that, I will say adieu to you in this episode of the Two Bros Wrestling Show. As I mentioned up top, if this is your first time viewing, this is not our normal format. Normally we have Doug here. We talk about the news. We have a main event topic. We give our match of the week or performance of the week, all that good stuff. We will be back to that before you know it. So just stay tuned here to our channels. But if it is your first time, definitely give us a comment, a watch, a subscribe, follow us, and you will not miss out on an episode. Until we have that next episode, this is Kevin saying, go watch some wrestling. See you soon.